Namaste and welcome to the Center for Indic Studies seminar, online seminar. We are in the festival season. Diwali is round the corner, Kali Puja is round the corner. So greetings to you all for this festive season. And today we will discuss a concept which may be very provoking to some, and it is in the context of medicine. So when we say medicine, it's sometimes better to put an adjective before it because, as you know, there are so many different medicinal systems. So in the Indic context, we have a ministry now called Ayush, which looks into Ayurveda, Unani, Siddhi, homeopathy. Then in NIH, in the National Institutes of Health, in its complementary medicinal systems, it lists, for example, traditional Chinese medicine, TCM. So there are different variants. So we will look at what I am calling Western medicine, which of course may be a little amusing, but just to kind of contrast it to these other systems. So in the Indic system, in the Indic medicinal systems, there, of course, is a big scope for Indic texts, Indic scriptures to creep in. But in the context of what we call allopathic medicine or Western medicine, it's supposed to be evidence-based. There isn't much room for mysticism in it. So our speaker, Dr. Sudhir Bansal, would like to question that hypothesis. Bansal ji is a practicing MD, specializing in metabolism, diabetes, endocrinology, and he has been practicing for decades now in this country. But he has a deep, abiding interest in Indic scriptures, and he likes to take that wealth and use it in his practice. And so we are very delighted that Bansalji has agreed to give this seminar. So Bansalji, our typical protocol is that you will speak for about 35-40 minutes uninterrupted. And then we will have a Q&A, which will be about maybe 15 minutes to 20 minutes. So with that, Bansalji, over to you.
Namaskar. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Okay. Namaskar. Good morning. I would like to start with a Mangalacharya. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvi Navadhitamastu Ma Midvashavahi. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. I have put a interpretation of this sloka. This is very well known. But essentially what we are wishing by this Mangalacharya recitation is we are wishing that we be showered with blessings, which means both all of the audience, both the person who's speaking as well as the people who are participating actively, in my opinion, by listening. I also put a saying from Mr. William Blake. Any questions there? Sorry? No. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is. और उन्होंने जिस तरह इसको quotation लिया है, it is very pertinent because what he's done, he's put infinite. Everything would appear to man as it is. Infinite, and there is a hyphen between in and finite. So that the finite, in my opinion, is coming out of the infinite. That's what he's trying to say here.
Bansalji, would you like to share your PowerPoint file with us now, or?
Oh, is the PowerPoint not showing?
No, right now.
Oh, sorry. Let's see why it's not showing. I'm going to end the show. I'm going to close this out. I am sorry about that. Let's see. Share screen. Share screen.
It has your PowerPoint file. Yeah.
आ गया PowerPoint? नहीं आया अभी.
No, you see that PowerPoint logo? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, now we can see it.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. वो white और black जो मैं आपको समझा रहा था उस चक्कर में तो बिल्कुल ही garbage हो गया. चलो.
No
ठीक.
problem. Please.
So we just went through this Mangalacharya. So my topic for today is going to be how mysticism in the Hindu texts helped me to practice Western medicine. And then in the bottom, I have put knowing, being, and becoming. And that would be the center of my talk today. There's a misspelling on November. मेरे slides जो होते हैं, they are just handmade slides, so I'm not a very good typist. So please excuse that at some points. And then in the next one, I've said what I will put. Number one, when this talk started, so Kalyan ji ne mere ko, he asked me if I would put together, and I was thinking more. In the olden days, we used to have these fireside conferences when I was growing up, and you would assemble. India mein fireside to nahi thi, but we used to still call them fireside conferences. When I came in England, there were some fireside conferences where the consultants would sit down. They would be in a sofa. Even in England, they would be in a sofa. And because we were Indians, maybe we would sit a little lower. And there would be a discussion which was pretty open. It was more of a conversation. It was not a lecture. And that's why when I thought about this, I think what has happened with doing the Zoom meetings, it has taken that spirit of interaction. So मैं आप लोगों को देख सकता हूँ, but obviously my limited experience, I may not be that good with the chat box and stuff, but also I can't see raising of the hands of the whole audience and the participation. So I have to assume in some ways that you are listening to me. I do want to present that this is experiential knowledge, especially when I present the cases. These are actual cases. These are actual instances which happened in my own personal practice. And how I resolved them, not at that time, unfortunately, but subsequently. And if we want to expound on it, we can get back to it. But these are actual interactions where things did not go well. And then coming back home, literally using the logic from the text, Hindu text, I started to reason to myself as to what I could have done to avoid that interaction. So some of them are fairly traumatic in my own experience, because these are instances which I've picked up. Everything is going well. We don't go on a text to try and see why things went well. Then it was supposed to go well. When the car runs well, we don't take it to the mechanic. When the car doesn't run well, then we want to call the mechanic. So the topics from my viewpoint are going to be dependent upon Hinduism, sacred texts, mystics and mysticism, and then my own personal experiences. I'll try to shorten some of the things so that we can have time for the question. So if the slides are being shared later on, you can please go back and look at Rita. Rita is a very strong word which is used in the Rig Veda, for example, about 450 times. And why I had put that in is because in my mind, Western philosophy looks at a road and it looks at it as a straight line. Whereas the Hindu philosophy, in my opinion, is cyclical. Our own reincarnation process is cyclical. We come back, go away. Our cyclicity is there, and it is inherent in our Hindu way of life. And Rita is felt to be not only the controller of the living humans, the non-living humans, the cosmos, this world, but the entire what we call जो पूरा हमारा जो अब हम दूसरे वाले न्यू माइक्रोस्कोप telescope से भी देख रहे हैं, जो दूसरे space वाली exploration से देख, the whole thing is controlled, and there is some mechanism for control, and there's some energy in this control. एक तो स्पंदन है, and that स्पंदन is also controlled in some way. So what do I personally look at Hinduism? Like I said, I try to put it in some kind of an order. So I thought the best way would be to put it in slides. So this is a slide which talks about that even the Supreme Court, when challenged, and I don't know why I put 2023. I don't think it was in 2023. It was, I think, in 1995 or something. When the Supreme Court decision was challenged, and there was a person who wanted to actually, in terms of renaming some of the places in Delhi, was trying to look at and said, we need to go back to the old names which existed. And his basis was, these were basically Hinduism. And on that basis, I think the Mughal garden had just been named. Anyway, he went back and challenged the court. And the court even said, Hinduism is not a religion, but a way of life. So if we are going to define a way of life, we have to have certain central principles. What are we living by? What do I understand? What is Hinduism then? So Hinduism ke jo central tenets hai, because we don't have a book, we don't have a priest. I mean, we have priests, but we don't have a central incarnation which was born. So there are certain, if it is a way of life, what are the central principles of this way of life? And I would say it's a moral life which is based on dharma, artha, kama, moksha. I'm not just saying it. These are the central pillars which are put in our text. And moksha is something which we try to attain. Dharma, artha, kama is something we live by. And reincarnation is a rebirth on which most of the central principles, and there was one time there was a lecture I listened up in the Oxford School, and actually he put in reincarnation even in front of everybody else, all of the other ones, because if you look at Sikhism, you look at Buddhism, you look at Jainism, these are the other religions which have come out of India, by the way. So India is one of the few countries where 4 religions which are currently living and working were born out of. And reincarnation is central to all of them. When do we practice these? We practice these through our various ashramas. So we have 4. Number 1 is when we are born and when we are a student. A lot of times there is significance attached to celibacy in brahmacharya, which is what it exactly means, but that has nothing to do with celibacy. It is more in my mind in terms of learning, acquiring the dharmic principles, acquiring a way of life, acquiring what morality is, so we can then practice it. In those days when life was about 50, the first 12 years was spent in brahmacharya. The student went to the Gurukul. The Gurukul was not just a school where books were instructed, but actually life was instructed, because he took care of the cows, he took care of the wife of the guru, he took care of the house cleaning. So if you look at any of our old movies or if any of our old texts, they talk about brahmacharya. Then we come into grihastha ashram, which is when you are a householder. We are trying to progeny, we are trying to create wealth, we are trying to kind of foster society in general. Subsequently, we start thinking we have done our way of life, everything has been done, and we start to transfer into vanprastha and then sannyasa, and we give up all worldly goods. So when did Hinduism come in? Well, the word Hindu actually comes from Indu, and there was a cartographer, an old Greek cartographer, or the Persians had put the name Indu, and as time went on, and we became the subjects of the queen, she wanted to actually give, in my mind, what I would now name as akar to something which was nirakar. So she structured Hinduism, and Hinduism at that point became a life of its own, or became a structure of its own. So one of the things which our queen did as a subject was everybody who lived south of Sindh River, and I had a map of the Sindh River, but by the way, some of these texts are from a lady, a historian in India, Delhi, I think she's based in Thapar. It's a history of India, very well written book, very extensive on tracing the background of the Indian continent. And she does not, by the way, I mean, because I put her name in at this time, she does not want to put this word akar and nirakar, but my own impression is something which was nirakar, which is a moral society, which was living by its value system, now was given a structure, and the structure had the efficiency to fall and live. So the fact that Hinduism is living, despite the queen putting her stamp to make it something which could be destroyed. Remember, anything which has an akar can become vikar. Anything which is nirakar can never become vikar. So in my opinion, the queen put the structure of akar to make it vikar at some point, but she was inefficient in doing so. I have put a few things here. So dharma means prayer. So the dharmic principles, this was somehow the slide got split. So when you look at the Western world, most of us will do a prayer in the morning, we'll work during the day, and we have life home in the evening. Whereas dharma in Hinduism, prayer is a part of life. When we work, it is a part of life. When we come home, we practice the same dharma. So the dharma kind of penetrates through. And I've picked up just 2 shlokas, which I think we should skip. But I've said enough about dharma itself and the principles which I think Hinduism is based on. So let's look at the text of just a few words about the sacred text of Hinduism. They're basically mostly split into 2. When we talk about our standard text, those are the Vedas. The Vedas in themselves are split into 4 parts. Initially, when people were uniting, they were afraid of the heavens, they were afraid of nature, they didn't know what nature was about. So they used to pray to the nature. So most of these were hymns to the nature. So most of the time we say that the Brahmanas or the early Vedic scripts, one second, thanks. So the early Vedic scripts don't have too much philosophical text. But look at Nasadya Suktam. Nasadya Suktam comes out of the Rig Veda. 10th, I think it's the 10th book, 129 verse. And what it says is that who knows what was there before God was even there? Who created God? What existed? And that again talks about that Spandan or the Rita, in my opinion, where there was a movement in the waters. But enough said. The Shruti literature then encompasses our Vedas. And 2 points about it. A lot of times we talk about them as being a Parusha, means that no Parush, no human being gave them. So what? I mean, did God actually come down in India or in Hindustan or Bharatvarsh, whatever we want to call it, and enunciate these texts? Obviously not. It has to be a human being who basically enunciated. So when we say it is Aparusha, I think it's the knowledge base they are talking about. These were rishis who had closed their outside senses. They generated what we call tapasya. Did they get hot? Tapas means hot. So did they get warm? Did the body temperature go up? No. The body temperature did not go up. Their integrity, their intuition, their understanding of the world went around. And as a result, they enunciated these verses. So it's not surprising that we have a lot of the Upanishadic verses. We have a lot more Upanishads. So somebody can say, well, why don't you have a canonical text? And I'll come to that in a minute. Well, the reason is visions can be multiple. Everybody can have a vision. You and I, we concentrate, we have a vision of the world outside. Now we concentrate on the inside, we can have a vision. So through the years of 3,000 years, we had texts which appeared and they became Aparusha. So the knowledge was revealed by a human, but the source of that knowledge was Aparusha. It was not a human being. It was an intuition. It was an understanding. It was a vision which Vivekananda has referred to as the super sensation vision. He's talked about, and if you look at Vivekananda, he talks about the fact that not always everything can be taught by science. There is something above the level of the mind which needs to be given, and we can talk about it. That's what we talk about, mysticism. So anyway, so jumping ahead, this knowledge is eternal. So we need, Sukalyanji had mentioned that there are students in. We need to have confidence. We don't need to have a Bible. We don't need to have a central text. Our texts are very beautiful and knowledge-based. They are explaining to us a lot of knowledge. Subsequently, obviously, that these were reinterpreted. The Puranas came out, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and they can be split into historical literature because they were transferred. The early Shruti literature was given by voice, it was heard, and it was enunciated. Out of this, we basically, most of us would agree, especially the Vedantics, that there are three canonical texts. The Upanishad, which are injunctive texts. Again, we don't have time to go through all of these because I want to get into the experiential part. The Bhagavad Gita, which is the practical text, which tell us how to run life in general, and the Brahma Sutras, which are the formulative texts, which actually explain the Upanishads further. So they go through more explanation of the Upanishadic literature. So what is mysticism? Mysticism, again, this is taken off. There is, by the way, there is a gentleman called Mahendranath Sarkar. He was a professor of philosophy in Calcutta in the 1930s. And he was invited in Europe to give lecture series to explain what Hinduism was about. And one of his texts, this is you can look at it later on, but this is in his preface taken off, where he explains mysticism for himself. But that text is called the Mysticism in the Bhagavad Gita. And he actually goes through explaining the Vedantic point of view, both from the Advaitic point of view and the dualistic point of view, both the Madhavacharyas and the Vaishnavites and so on. And it is one of the very beautiful texts. But what we are talking about here is knowledge which is to be gained, which arises in the demands of life while you're working. And it differs from philosophy. It's not an intellectual demand. It is not something where you sit. Remember, we had that thing where I tried to quickly present that in Hinduism, our philosophy is not only in the temple, but also in the workplace and also in life in general, when we come back and live with our families, when we are not working. So this talks about an approach to truth through life. Living is more than thinking. It is actually application. It is experiential. And during the next few 20 minutes or so, when I talk about the cases, I will talk about that. I'm going to skip this and this. And let's say, what is existence? So the mysticism talks about the mystical truth. It talks about existence can be placed on three bases. It's threefold. The material world, which is the Jagat, the soul or the human being, which is the Jiva, and that there has to be some controller, whether it is Rita, whether it is an actual human, as the dualistics would place it, or it is God, or it is just an energy source, but there has to be a control of everything. And our sacred texts raise our consciousness level of the Jiva, explaining that we are non-material spiritual beings. All of us have a sense of divinity within. Sri Aurobindo has talked about it. For example, Vivekananda talks about it and says that we are all born, when we are born, whether if you want to follow the dualistic trend where Ramanuja places a small amount of divinity in each human, this is what needs to be grown. So according to Sri Aurobindo, as we evolve, as we go and become humans, that divinity is minimized. And the purpose of living this life is to maximize that divinity within and manifest it. And according to him, that divinity is going to take its shape. You are going to become divine. The purpose of our spiritual life is to make this divinity manifest at this time. I'm now going to go out and okay. So I'm going to go to the patients and present those to you. And the idea of presenting my experience would be under these tasks. It would be to focus the task at hand and not the result and giving up doership. I'll show that. Empathy and not science wins the day. I think I will talk about respond and not react first, and then self-abnegation later on. And then without a patient example, I will present some understanding when we can prevent the burnout of prapati by prapati and pratihara. So I know that the audience is not a physician-based audience, so let me talk about this. This is a diabetic patient. Diabetes, I'm sure most of us have relatives. It's such a prevalent disease. About 10, 12% of the people have it. 1 in 7 people have it. So we know that diabetics are pretty abound. Diabetes is a biochemical disease which is presenting to us with elevated blood sugars in our bloodstream. So Kalyanji, I have tried to present it so that the lay audience, non-physician audience can understand it. If you feel that there are steps, then please just somehow, maybe you can use your mic to interrupt it.
No, this is perfect. Please continue.
So the diabetic patient with an elevated blood sugar doesn't come to us saying his blood sugars are elevated, but it damages, as we know, his heart, kidneys, eyes, lower limbs. So as a result, the physicians are entrusted to control the blood sugars. And since 1970, biochemistry has advanced so much, we now have a blood test which can show us if the diabetic is in control or not. Those of you who are diabetics who know the name of this blood test, is called a hemoglobin A1C. We generally check it every 3 months. And if the numbers are more than 7%, we are felt to have not achieved a goal. So the goal, it is a goal, it has become from management. Can you see the change? It has become changed from management of symptoms, from wellness of the patient, to changing it to a biochemical goal assessment strategy. And the goal is not only judged, unfortunately, by the patient. The goal is also being judged by people who are looking at the physician. In other words, we have insurance companies, we have external controls, we have multiple agencies who are looking after how the physician functions. If Dr. Verma is listening, then he would know what I'm talking about, for example. And these agencies are telling us I am failing. So my job is to make sure that I get good results. Let's say a patient walks into my office. I have seen him, and this, like I said, these are actual patients whom I had seen. I look at the results before I walk into the room. His number is 10%. Now, each 1% is basically a major problem. It's telling me that it's about 20% greater chance of complication, by the way. So am I upset? Yes. Have I made my mind up? Yes. Do I already know this patient didn't, how we control it by giving good medicines, the nature of the disease, and what the patient does to his lifestyle. Some of you've got family members, so you need to take less sugar, you need to exercise, you need to watch your diet, you need to control your weight. So what am I going to do when I walk into this room? I am going to be annoyed. I'm going to be upset. I am unhappy. I don't have empathy for this patient. I am ready to bounce. So I am not focusing on the work at hand. I'm not focusing on management of the disease, but I am actually focusing on the result. I already know the result. I already know that the patient didn't do well. So I'm not willing to listen to the patient that his mother had died, a mother had gone away. He didn't have a time to cook the meals. He was eating out. Meals were being served, which were very poor. I am just ready to tell him, you are not doing the right job, my friend. Look at it on the other side. I mean, the goal does not change. I'm not saying become pessimistic. I'm not saying don't focus on the 10%. The approach should be, when I walk into this room, I'm ready to work with the patient, and all we can do is instruct, talk to the person, find out what is at fault. So if we were, on the other hand, to try to work on not the goal, not just the A1C, not forgetting the A1C, but actually working on how to achieve the A1C. Because all I can do is work on trying to make sure that everything works. So I take away what has been referred to in our text, focus on the goal and how to achieve it. There are multiple shlokas. I have put one from the Bhagavad Gita here. You can look at that, but I am going to, with your permission, jump to the next patient, where I don't talk about the focusing on the goal, but I talk about a different patient. There was a gentleman called Abraham Flexner. He was in 1930s. He looked at the medical schools in this country, and he came up with the hypothesis that in those days, of course, there was a lot of black medicine, meaning a black box medicine. You did medicine which was not very scientific. So he laid the strategies for making medicine very scientific, and he emphasized that. So what we came up with, the logic, was there was a cause of the disease, and if you treated the disease was cured and the symptoms went away. Remember this model. So this is the model Western medicine is taught on most of the time. I won't say that empathy is not taught on, people are realizing it, but I'm just focusing it on my end, how we use it. There is a gland in the neck called thyroid gland. Part of our patients come with problems with the thyroid. Thyroid hypothyroid, which this slide says, hypo means less, so the gland is not working efficiently. Years before biochemistry became and molecular medicine became that good, we used to diagnose these patients based on symptoms. So people were fat because the metabolic rate would go down. They would be cold. They weren't burning enough energy. The skin would be dry. The skin would be thick. The nails would fall off. They would be tired at 4 o'clock. Over the years, just like the A1C in the diabetic example, we started with tests which are much better. So we could diagnose the patient even before he got symptoms. In fact, some of our patients, when they were told based on the tests, started developing symptoms. They became constipated. They became tired at 4 o'clock because now they realized they were underactive thyroid. When you treat this disease, the diagnosis is being made partly by the blood work. So when you treat the disease, are you going to correct the blood abnormality, or you're going to make the patient less fat, You're going to make the patient active. You're making him less tired. He doesn't need his coffee at 4 o'clock. Unfortunately, not. A lot of times when we treat disease, like for example, take a car. If the car doesn't run and you go and change the battery and the starter is off, the car is not going to start running because you changed the battery. So let's say that the hypothyroid patient, you made that diagnosis, the patient eats too much, doesn't exercise, he's fat, he's lazy, he's tired. He doesn't admit those symptoms, but those symptoms are not being caused by his underactive thyroid. It makes sense to us that if we now treat this person for adequacy of the dose of the thyroid, he comes in to your office, his symptoms have not gone away because his expectation was, I have these symptoms, I have the disease, they must be related. You treat my disease, you say I'm cured, I say I have all these symptoms. What the hell are you talking about? So we are both sitting at the opposite ends of the room. I'm ready to pounce on him with science saying biochemistry suggests that you are absolutely in control. And he's ready to pounce on me telling me my disease process is not controlled. As a result, at this point, what comes about is empathy with the patient, listening to the patient. You're not going to overtreat his thyroid. You're not going to make the medicines different, but you're not going to achieve much by pushing science on the patient either. He's not willing to accept that, right? So what we need to do is to sit down, listen with the patient, explain, sometimes very successfully, that it is not related to your thyroid gland. You need to keep working. You need to cut down your food. You need to maybe start exercising, maybe move around. Whatever is bothering him, you start looking at the symptoms and focusing in on, like my slide says, on healing and being a team with the patient and not the only one in control. Some of these patients at times have been told on the telephone by your nurse because they didn't do the blood test in time. So when they came to the office, they didn't have the blood test. So when the nurse calls the patient up and says, your blood test is in control, the doctor told me continue the same dose, the patient is again ready to say, I am not in control. What the hell is he talking about? Let's talk about this other third patient. This is a patient. In each of these, remember, I'm only presenting the worst ones. Not all of my patients are unhappy, thank God. So this is the patient. Osteo means bone, porosis means bone thinning. So there is a disease process where the bones are thinned and they are more likely to break or fracture. Now, when we put some of these patients on certain medicines, they are very costly. So the insurance companies are trying to make not very favorable to give the cost of the medicine. So sometimes we will explain to the patient, this medicine is given to you every 6 months, but you need to be partly responsible. My office will try to get you this medicine, but if the insurance company doesn't come through, please call us back. And we go through this contractual. In my days, I didn't write contracts to the patient, but I would explain to them, this is what you need to undertake at your end. Patient, and actually some of these medicines, if you don't do it every 6 months, the patient is worse than they started. So now the patient comes into the office, you see him in 9 months, he didn't get the dose at 6 months. You go in, you say to the patient, I told you that you needed to call me if your medicine doesn't come through. Yes, I called. What happened? Oh, your staff didn't pick it up. Okay. Did you call back? Yes, I called back twice. Your staff picked up and said you were out because you had COVID. Okay. Did you call back? Did you try to get back? Why should I keep getting back? It's your job to give me the medicine. The person is not necessarily wrong, but in this fast-paced society, when you have made the patient an equal partner in the disease process, and explain to them. And by the way, we don't do this to old 90-year-old people. We would only do it for somebody who can understand, who has a telephone. This person, actually, I recall very well, was actually on the news channel lines and stuff. And unfortunately, it made my life more difficult. But she knew what she was talking about. She was an intelligent individual. So if she's missing her medicine, she's already missed it, by the way, right? Whatever damage had to be done has to be done. I can look forward and start acting. In this situation, we tend to react. My reaction is, why the hell are you not doing this when I'm telling you to do this? It is very important. On the other way, if I walk away, I give myself a few minutes, I come back and I say, listen, whatever has happened has happened. I need to respond. I had time to ponder. I had time to think. I had time to be empathetic. I have time to take my resources into the room and really use it in a better fashion than I end up by using if I react. So each of these patient instances, I have fixed up some shlokas from the Gita, one from the Vedas, but you can apply your knowledge base in any of them. Another thing, in all patients, we feel as physicians, let's say if my car breaks down, I take it to a mechanic. Does the mechanic know more about my car than I will ever know? The answer is yes. Can the mechanic explain all the intricacies of the car to me in the next 15 minutes and say, this is what I would do? The answer is no. So we've been instructed by society to make the patients an equal partner in our process and thereby bring ourselves at the same level of control as the patient, meaning we are in partnership with the patient. This is what, in my opinion, Vivekananda talks about, the self-abnegation, or giving up the ego, or giving up the doership, that I am in command. So for the purposes of time, I will leave this, but it is very important that when the physician uses this, he maintains his equanimity and composure. There is a whole saying here, you can see it, which is from Swami Vivekananda's talks on Karma Yoga. A very common syndrome right now is burnout. What is burnout? Burnout is a term which was coined in 1970s. It is for professionals. It's people who are working hard. So it could be for any profession, but it especially became very common during the COVID crisis. And what happens as a result is you have these patients who are crowding out, especially if you looked at the TV. It didn't happen in my practice. That's why I took it up. But there are patients who are dying all over. Physicians were losing control. They didn't have time. The nurses were running around. And multiple things were being projected on the TV. So I could have 30 patients in my hospital, and the next hospital had 20 patients. But somehow the news channel projected that 20 patients. And I'm saying, oh my God, I'm taking care of patients as well. Why are they not talking about me on the TV? That is what the Gita talks about, nindas tatarmoni. You know, we are very happy to criticize the other person. We want to be praised. We want to be compared. In stress, the hospitals have started a process, what they call meditation. Now, meditation, let's see the next slide first before. It's a term which comes out from pratihara. What does ahara mean? Ahara commonly we understand in terms of food or in terms of something which is feeding us. So ahara actually is a general term which means what is coming to our senses, what is food for our senses. So what annoys me is the clamor of the patient, is the amount of work. How do I realize the work? By my mind, by seeing patients who are sick, by seeing patients who are dying. So prati means negating that sensory input. So do you actually go into the room and you say, okay, 20 patients are admitted, but I don't care. I don't see them. I don't learn them. I don't witness them. The answer is no. That's not what we are saying. But when you are stressed and you're thinking about all 20 of them together, it is hard to focus. That is why Patanjali Yoga Shastra, one of the first shlokas, I think it's the second shloka, which talks about chit vritti nirodhaya. What it's saying is that your mind needs to take in one vritti. It is mentioned in the Hindu literature, in some of the Hindu texts, that there is only one vritti which can come into our brain. There's only one thought we can entertain at one time. It is because we are scattering our brains in multiple thoughts. That's why we have the vritti in the brain. And all it does is scatter our brains. We cannot concentrate. We are not focused. So meditation teaches us the art of focusing. A lot of the hospitals started 15, 20 minutes of meditation in the morning and in the afternoon. But what we really need to bring is this meditation room into the room full of patients in the hospital or outside. Meaning the ability to concentrate again on the task at hand without getting into fluxes of different thought processes at the same time. That's what samadhi is. That's what yajna is. So you're concentrating on one thought. There are differences when one looks at the Advaitic discipline. You bring the meditation in, you recognize what you have to do. Your mind is calm. Now you try to see divinity in your patients. You see them as divine as well. When we started the meeting with Namaskar, we were doing Namaskar to the God in all of the audience. So it's the same thing. Not only are we having a little touch of divinity, and it's not the ego divinity, by the way. It's not the Sudhir Bansal has divinity in. It's my ultimate self, which has the divinity in, which I need to represent with the patients. Same way, when we give ourselves up to God in the bhakti mode, we bring that bhakti mode into the room and we try to focus on our patients as being equal recipients of our love and affection. Remember, bhakti is unconditional love. Bhakti is not prayer. So if you look at the Narad Bhakti Sutra, it talks about what is bhakti. Bhakti is love, which is not dependent upon time, which is unconditioned. I think I've talked enough, Sukalyanji. So I'm going to stop at this point and open this to conversation. Enough to talk about a lot here, but I have shared some of the views. I want to let you know that in a day, I would see about 30 patients, 25 patient visits a day. So, I practiced for 40 years. So I actually picked up the 3 or 4 instances. And honestly speaking, these patients actually went to the board of medicine and complained. Thank God there were only 3 or 4 of them, right? But at that point, the board said, what the hell is going on? I mean, you've been practicing for 30 years, and these happened in a very short space of time. So we are all get attorneys and so on. We won't get into that, but to defend myself. But the biggest defense I presented to the board was that I was going back on my Vedic roots. I'm not kidding. I'm going back. My lawyer didn't want me to do it. I sent them a personal letter. I'm going back on my Vedic roots. I'm going to analyze my own behavior. I could say I see 30 patients a day, 27 of them are happy, 3 of them are unhappy. What the hell? These people must be totally wrong. The idea is not to focus on why 27 are right. They give us happiness. Maybe they don't complain. But to focus on the 3 who are unhappy. Get back to our roots. Look back, can our roots teach us something to work upon? And I sent them each of these patients responses, some of which I have paraphrased here. I didn't send them the Gita shlokas, but it was very positive. I'm pretty sure that I would have been sent to a remedial course, which meant 4 months out of my practice, going into a different town and attending with different people. So, like I said, my attorney didn't think anything would come out of it, but, they recognized it. They recognized my longevity in the medicine field, and then it has suddenly happened. Maybe I was under stress, whatever, but it worked well for me. So I am truly relating instances where experience, which is a true experience.
Thank you so much, Bansalji, for this very illuminating talk where you married the knowledge with experience, and experience is what kind of teaches us and what makes us live our lives the way we do. So thank you so much, and we now will move into the question answer session. But before we do that, if you could please put on your cameras, we would like to take a screenshot. So please switch on your cameras, and then Shamant will take a couple of pictures. And so this is the time you can use also to frame your questions, to kind of think over, to crystallize the questions. So Shamant, are you ready? Just a moment, please. Shamant, are you ready to take the screenshots? I will do so. So please put on your smiling faces. There we go. Number 1. And just give me a moment. I'll take one more. Okay, so one more. There we go. Thank you. And so we are ready now for the Q&A session. We had one question for you, Bansalji, very early on in your talk. So let me begin with that. And that is, what is your position or guidance to us on COVID injections or COVID vaccinations?
Okay, the Vedantic approach would not work here. So this is where Flexner's approach, the Abraham Flexner. By the way, Abraham Flexner's report is still very valid in the medical field. And he was a non-physician who looked at the hospitals in this country. And actually, I think about half of the hospitals closed after that. And the other hospitals had to start taking a very scientific approach towards medicine. So he basically said that science should rule the day. And unfortunately, we took it further on. Now the time is when I know that today Apur is not here, but some of us know Apur Gupta very well. And Apur has been doing a number of broadcasts on empathy in medicine. And empathy in medicine has become very common. As far as COVID vaccination is concerned, in my opinion, COVID vaccination clearly works. I retired, by the way, in October of 2021 from face-to-face medicine. I still do clinical trials. And the reason I say that is I caught COVID in January, right before the first vaccination came out. And I had a terrible, I'm not a sick person. I'm in touch wood, but I've not been sick. I don't think I have totally recovered. I walked 5 miles this morning before I started this session, by the way. I get up at 6 still or 5:30, read my text, and then walk. But my exercise tolerance doing the stairs is not the same after the COVID. So I do think that COVID has a negative influence. I think we are all talking today and sitting in the fashion we are sitting, unfortunately because of COVID, but I have also gone to face-to-face conferences, which I have enjoyed more. So I do think that the COVID vaccination helps. The question is probably more related to the boosters because most of us have taken the COVID vaccine. I personally I went to Ireland, and one day before the next dose came out, I was actually in the pharmacy to take the COVID shot. And he said the new shot has not come out. I think we were going on 13th of September and the shots were being released on the 14th. I went, I got COVID on my last day coming back from Ireland. I had taken the drug with me, it's not allowed, but I had imposed on one of my friends to give me a prescription. So I did start the drug therapy right away, but I did have not a very great time, again, the second time around with the COVID. I do think that the COVID vaccination in certain groups, especially the booster, has been shown not to be useful. For example, the Florida governor, one of the states I'm in, has mentioned not to use the booster in healthy people. We are not talking about people above the age of 65. We are not talking about people who have either diabetes, hypertension, comorbid condition, heart failure, kidney disease. If something of that exists, I think the booster is definitely indicated. The booster in healthy young adults, the logic is that there is enough herd immunity, what we call enough people got it, so enough people are immune, maybe they don't need to take it. So I think the younger people could judge it, discuss it with their own physicians and find out. But people who have underlying diseases or are above 65, myself, for example, I'm 77, should take the vaccination, the booster.
Thank you, Bansalji. So we have a question from Pratibha Graman. She joins us from the West Coast. And just for information, she will be one of our future seminar speakers on neuroscience, on the overlap between neuroscience and psychology. So
Wonderful.
Pratibha, go ahead, please.
Well, thank you so much for taking this. This is such a wonderful information, first of all, that you've given. But I know lots of people want to speak, so I want to go to this point that to me, it seemed obvious that people have to begin to know more that they are more than the physical body and the medicines that are used today. So the thing is how to do that. You know, we can't just say to people, you know, you have a divinity. I mean, this is appropriate in some ways for some groups, but I was thinking maybe the most practical is to introduce how important the breath is. I mean, breath is something that has a certain a tangibility to it, but also an intangibility. And there are plenty of studies now that show its effectiveness, but yet how to bring it to people, who has to first tell them to give this introduction and all that, is really an aspect. This, I was wondering what your views are. You had some ideas.
I think in terms of the first question you posed, I think you posed a couple of questions in there, if I may paraphrase. The first question you proposed is healing purely medicine? And the answer is clearly all of us know that that is not true. Healing involves beyond medicine. For example, my sister, who's 4 years older than me, I just found out she had pancreatic cancer and is now, unfortunately, the cancer has recurred and she's not going to make it. But I can tell you, when I talk to her, I start off feeling depressed. And when I end my conversation, and my wife who's listening to this could supplement it, not necessarily, but we are more positive because she actually gives us a sense that, oh, I'm doing so well. I have these nurses who come into the house. They look after me well. I have a good support system. I have my family, which is supporting me. You call me every day. So medicine, clearly there is something about, I mean, it's not going to change her cancer output, right? Same way with the hypothyroid patient I presented, the second patient. I'm not going to change her dose of medicine based on the fact that she just has symptoms in regards to the thyroid pill. Because my biochemistries have become a little bit better, probably. One, that is open to question, by the way. But let's say we assume that for a fact at the present time, then we're not going to change the medicine, but that does not stop us from being empathetic. The only trouble is when the insurance companies and our employers tell you you can only spend 15 minutes and the person wants to talk about her dog, which has just recently died, and therefore she cannot follow the diet, and I'm pushing on the diet, and she's talking about her mother-in-law who's visiting, who makes her life miserable. It becomes very difficult to focus on that Flexner hypothesis versus what you raise, which is absolutely correct, by the way, and empathy. Because if I don't show her empathy, she's going to say, this guy's a nut. I don't want to listen to him. I'm not going to follow his diet. I'm not going to do anything he says, including take the medicines in time. So there is got to be a breakthrough in regards to the empathetic aspect and somehow gleaning time, taking time, and that's where the art of medicine comes in, I think. I'm going to jump away from the exact answer. I think you also asked about the breathing. So the last time when we had this session with Ambassador Bhandari, he clearly talked about how the pranayama is not just purely taking a breath. This morning, Sukalyanji is also going to go to another session very soon. Next week, Swami Sarvpriyanandaji is coming. But when I walk, I basically listen to him quite a bit. And I was listening to him, and he was talking about, in fact, that's why I took that thing of knowing, becoming, and being from one of his talks. And he talks about, I think, Swami Ashokanandji, who was a very old, time priest who had established something in Sacramento. He's written a paper on San Francisco. Sorry. Yes, that's right. And he had written a paper on, I'm just impressed with this gentleman's knowledge base. I mean, his recall is wonderful. He must be 20 years younger than me. I'm not going to ask him. So he was talking about the razor's edge, and he was talking about how pranayama is looked at as a physical discipline. But Mr. Bhandari had mentioned about the brain sensations. I think he is more of a tantric kind of approach. So he was talking about how it changes the brain waves. One of the ways you can use pranayama is in the Advaitic model of taking your breath in. When you take your breath in, you say, I am shutting out the world. And when you breathe the thing out, I think you say, no, when you take the breath in, you say, I'm Brahman. And when you breathe out, you say, I'm giving up the world. So that is one way of meditation in the Advaitic discipline. But apart from that, pranayama is more than what it has become. I mean, yoga itself, if you look at the Yoga Dipiti Pratiksha, it's by Yogi Prasad. Again, you'll remember the exact name. I have the book, but it's not a physical discipline. So I don't think pranayama is a physical discipline, and you're absolutely right. It has much more value-based system than we think.
Thank you, Bansalji. Your next question is from Balramji, and you may have alluded to it, but Balramji wants you to expound a little more on it. Your description of the patients, how did it impact you or the patients directly?
Okay. So number one, remember, these were negative instances I picked up. So these are patients, Balramji, who were not happy. I can tell you when I make a patient unhappy, and Tilak was listening for a while, he may have gone up, but he's got his phone, so he might be able to listen in and correspond with him. But when I make a patient unhappy, do I go home happy? Absolutely not. I feel miserable. It's like in any struggle, when you have an interaction with even a person who comes and cleans your house, and you say to them, oh, you shouldn't be doing this way. You should be doing it this way. And you say, why the hell did I say it this fashion? Why didn't I just say to her, I would like you if you approached my cleaning in this fashion? If I had walked away from that lady, who, by the way, was a very prominent journalist, I think, So she reported in such nice terminology that it looked like I was totally a miserable wretch, but that be it. So being said, initially my impact was, this lady was responsible for getting a drug every 6 months. I told her what she should do. She didn't do it. It's her problem. It's not my problem. Disease is getting worse. She said, well, if you can't do it, then I won't come back to your practice. Well, if you don't want to come back to my practice, that's perfectly fine. I'll discharge you from the practice. I won't even charge you for the notes. You can take your notes and my staff will copy it for you. That was my exact response. That whole day was spoiled. I wrote an answer to the state. I had another few weeks. I had to meet an attorney. It was miserable. So it is not just the secular impact on it. It has basically a big impact on your own professional understanding of yourself. On the other hand, if you had gone to the other room, drank a glass of water, said, okay, she's missed the dose for 3 months. I can't do anything about it anyway. There's nothing much I can do. I mean, she's missed the dose. If there's a negative impact, I have to accept it. All I can do is explain it to the patient. You missed the dose. I would really want you to come back in time. I will try to work with your insurance company that you can get the drug, and that would be the end of it. But in diabetics, whom I saw day in and day out, I would say that once I started thinking in these lines, I definitely changed away from the focus on looking at the end results and actually going into the patient's room and starting my questioning by saying, okay, so-and-so, your numbers are not in control. We talked about it last time. What is bothering you? Why are your numbers not in control? What is it, what I can do? It would be interjected somewhere in between. So it will be a much more open conversation rather than a judgmental conversation. I definitely learned that during the time period.
So if I can just ask, so it made difference in you, how you approached your understanding.
Absolutely. And
That's
not only my approach, Balramji, but it helps. Ultimately, we are in this relationship together, right? I mean, our purposes of working is not just for me to make money, go home and be happy. It's also for me to improve the life of somebody I'm seeing across from me within my limits. So I don't want to get into that egotistical approach that I am, totally in control. But I can definitely practice better medicine, I feel, if I truly, and the last lady, I forgot her name, but she brought it up. Being partnership with the patient takes a lot more from you, but you can be a partner with your patient. You can partner with your patient. It takes more. There's no doubt about it. And sometimes it is frustrating. I wouldn't say that all of my patients are beautifully controlled. I went home very happy that everybody was in control, but it wasn't anything less than I would have achieved by being purely judgmental.
Yeah. It will have an impact, obviously. The doctor is very important. Eventually, patients do pay attention. If you care about them, once they know that you care about them, they start cooperating. Thank you.
Yes, I like that part, that once the patient recognizes the caring attitude and not the judgmental attitude of the physician, that's what you're trying to impart on them. And you are recognizing, I mean, even when you're recognizing, I mean, we say that everybody is divine, we have a divine impact, we are basically talking about divinity in the patient, but we're also talking of a secular. I mean, this is a transactional reality. This is the Vyavharika reality of the Advaitic. I mean, this is the present day world. It is not the Pratibhasika, where I am Brahman and you are Brahman, and you can do whatever the hell you want to do, and I can do whatever I want to do. We are talking about transactional reality in this world, which is what we want to engage in. We want to engage them, and we want them to be engaged, and we want them to recognize that you have a positive value of engagement. I again emphasize these are experiential because I picked up the difficult ones. So it's not like, it is very much possible that some of the other ones may not even bring their complaints up. I may have been judgmental and they may not have brought it up. They may have just said, okay, I still need to work with this person and I still need to do what I want to do. So they are, somebody brings up a problem. When you get into a stumbling block, it's a time to look at yourself and say, what can I do different? And our first reaction is not that. Our first reaction is, oh my God, this person is terrible.
True. Thank you.
Thank you, Bansalji. So we have a question in the chat box from Dr. Jayanti Sahu, but Dr. Sahu, it's better, I think, if you ask it in person because it relates to your slide about knowing, being, and becoming. And her question is about the order of these three words. But Dr. Sahu, please go ahead.
नमस्कार,
सर,
आपको मैं
सर,
मिस
नमस्कार।
कर रहा था। आपको तो मैं देखकर बहुत खुश होता हूँ। आप मेरे को अभी भी याद है जब मैंने पहला लेक्चर भी लिया था एवोल्यूशन ऑफ कर्म योगा में, आपने उसमें भी, आपने भंडारी जी के साथ भी, सो आपका इंटरेक्शन बहुत प्लेजेंट होता है।
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for your kind words. But I'm really happy actually to see that the way you have interpreted the whole thing and you have applied the whole lot of Indian philosophical concepts to your medicine, scientific way of understanding the mind and body also. But and so many things. I myself am a hypothyroid patient. So I just struggle with many things, but
मैं भी hypothyroid हूँ, by the way. मैं भी hypothyroid हूँ.
yes. So I was listening very carefully to your this thing, but as I found that you have applied Advaita method, and at the same time you put knowing in the first and then being. So I little confused because in Advaita it is a metaphysical system, and in philosophy we start with a kind of metaphysical presupposition that being is there in the beginning, and then comes the knowing in the level of Maya, and then comes the that again the being, that is Brahma, the becoming, and know the knower. So that is what I was little worried, that can we change the order, that it can be being, then knowing, and then becoming, or it is a kind of Hegelian way of, or Marxian way of understanding the things, that being, non-being, and becoming.
उसके कमेंट में I would say two things. One, like I said, this was the second time I was listening to Swamiji in my morning walk. In fact, even today. So his lecture is titled "Knowing, Being," and he didn't say becoming. So actually, the person who introduced him was a Swami, and surprisingly, when he introduced him, he said, knowing, the topic for today is knowing and becoming. And it was so, Swami Sarpriyananda ji is a very patient person because I've met him a few times and काफी लोगों ने उनसे बात करी है. So he never interrupts somebody. And this was the first time he said, no, it's knowing is being. He said, not becoming. Becoming is something you change into, right? So the Advaitic philosophy is that we are actually Brahman. You know, we are Brahman, or we are the ultimate consciousness, and we just don't know it. So the question in my mind, actually, though he says knowing is being, is should knowing be, is knowing is being, or knowing and being is the right way? So if I were to look at myself, और हमने अपने लिए सोचा उसको, knowing, in a sense, when you look at knowing and say, can I just read a textbook and say, I know that I'm Brahman? I mean, that's not knowing. Knowing in an Advaitic sense, like he was quoting in this lecture, only maybe 5% people achieve. Even Vivekananda says very few people really understand or really realize, not so much understand, but realize. So knowing Brahman, that I am Brahman, then I don't have to do anything. Then being is not. But then he quotes a Buddhist text. और मैं इसको सुकल्याण जी, अगर आपने भी वो सुना है टेप तो मैं उसको गलत मलत बोलूंगा, बट आई थिंक उन्होंने बोला कि दो चीजें, फर्स्ट इज नोइंग and then to manifest that knowing. But if you can, so in the Buddhist text, according to the Buddhist text, there are two phases. The first phase is knowing, and then you have to implement. So knowing is not enough. So in fact, he quotes the fact, it becoming longer, but he quotes the fact that there are some people who may know that they have the knowledge, but to implement. Now, according to Sri Aurobindo, which I'm interjecting into his lecture, he didn't talk about this. Sri Aurobindo says that we have a portion, small portion of divinity in all of us. We are not totally realized Brahmans. We have to realize the evolution of the person, if I understand it right, his point of view. The evolution is in terms of understanding what that Brahman is and then expressing it. But he also talks about the fact that it's not becoming, it is being. So he, according to Sri Aurobindo, once you know, then you have to be. The typical Advaitic thing would be once you are Brahman, then you don't have to be, then you are automatically be. But he also alternates that. उन्होंने एक और book को quote करा था, Jivan Mukti by Madhusudan Saraswati. So I just downloaded that. I just read the preface. So I'm not at very good knowledge base to expose that. But maybe अगली बारी अगर कभी मिलेंगे साहू जी तब आपसे बात करेंगे. But Jivan Mukti of Madhusudan Saraswati is supposed to go through 3 steps of knowing and then how, what is really a Jivan Mukta. So जो एक स्वामी मुक्तानंद जी हैं, कौन है वो, कैलिफोर्निया से जो आते हैं, मेरे को नाम करेक्ट कर दीजिएगा सुकल्याण जी, उनका किताब लिखा है. He has written a book on many paths to infinite paths to infinite reality, and in his book he was just Hanji?
His name is Swami Medhanand.
मेधानंद जी का. तो उनका किताब मैं जब से 70 के पास गया तो नाम तो सब अपना ही नाम याद नहीं रहता. सो स्वामी मेधानंद जी का किताब में उन्होंने लिखा है कि the first step of knowing is you go up on the steps, you go in the world, I mean, realization, he's relating it to steps going up in the house. You reach the top of the house, you understand who you are, then you know you are Brahman. Now you look down on the world and everybody is Brahman in the world. And then you have the ability to deliver. So I think there he's still talking about knowing and becoming. But that is my interpretation. He doesn't use that word. But मैं ये सोचता हूँ कि knowing and becoming में difference है. So knowing is not becoming. Knowing and becoming is the right way. That is the way I interpret it for myself.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much, Bansal ji. We have exceeded our actually scheduled time, so I can't thank you enough for this very insightful and enriching and at the same time very helpful presentation. And though most of us are not practicing medical professionals, we can still take the message of empathy to whatever profession we belong to. So we will be putting this recording on our YouTube channel in maybe a couple of days. So, as I said, our next seminar, we have not yet finalized the date. It'll be first week of December, and it'll be very different in tone. It's about an accident near the Bombay port between 2 ships, collision of 2 ships, and how that kind of raised a whole lot of questions about insurance and offloading stuff. So a very different nature, but again relates to new laws in the Indian law book regarding ocean navigation. Anyway, so with that, thank you again so much. Namaste and my greetings to all on Diwali and Kali Puja and subsequent festivals as well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was a